9 years after a self-made millionaire ditched his humble black girlfriend on their first anniversary date, she marches back into his boardroom with triplet children and a will sealed with DNA proof poised to upend his fortune. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Amara Johnson smoothed the wrinkles from her simple dress, a purchase that had consumed 3 months of careful saving. The navy blue fabric wasn't designer, but it was the nicest thing she owned, selected specifically for this evening, her 1-year anniversary with Ethan Reynolds. She checked her reflection in the immaculate bathroom of Per Se, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, and felt the flutter of anxiety in her stomach that had nothing to do with morning sickness. "You belong here," she whispered to herself, though the woman staring back from the mirror, a 23-year-old girl from the Bronx with dreams bigger than her bank account, looked conspicuously out of place among the restaurant's wealthy clientele. Her fingers drifted to her small purse where the positive pregnancy test lay hidden. 2 weeks of morning nausea had confirmed what she already suspected. She was carrying Ethan's child. Despite her nervousness, a smile touched her lips as she imagined his reaction. Though they came from different worlds, she a scholarship MBA student from the projects, he the heir to the Reynolds real estate empire, he had slipped a dazzling engagement ring on her finger 6 months ago, promising they would build a life together. "Ms. Johnson?" The bathroom attendant's voice startled her. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, thank you." Amara squared her shoulders and stepped back into the dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in pristine white linen. Returning to their table, she checked her watch. Ethan was now 45 minutes late, uncharacteristic for him, especially on their anniversary. She sipped water, ignoring the pitying glances from nearby diners, clearly wondering if she'd been stood up. When Ethan finally arrived, Amara immediately sensed something was wrong. His customary warm smile was absent, replaced by an expression she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost businesslike. "Sorry I'm late," he said dryly, not leaning in to kiss her as he usually did. He sat down, adjusting the sleeves of his Armani suit with mechanical precision. "Is everything okay?" she asked, reaching for his hand across the table. He pulled back slightly. "We need to talk, Amara." Before she could share her news, Ethan extracted an envelope from his suit's inner pocket. "My mother hired investigators to look into your background," he stated, sliding the envelope across the table. "Your father abandoned your family when you were 8. Your mother works as a cleaning lady in 3 different places. You grew up in public housing, attended public schools in the Bronx." Confusion washed over Amara's face. "You already knew all of this. I've never hidden anything about where I come from." "The issue isn't what you told me, Amara. It's what it all means." Ethan adjusted his silk tie, not quite meeting her eyes. "Reynolds Enterprises is finalizing a $2.3 billion merger with international investors. My mother reminded me of my responsibilities to the family legacy." Understanding began to form on Amara's face as Ethan continued. "A girl from the Bronx like you will never fit into my world. My mother is right. You would be a burden to the Reynolds family legacy." "A burden?" Amara's voice cracked. "I thought you loved me." "I had fun, Amara. You're interesting. Different from the women I usually date. But let's be realistic. You don't have the sophistication, the connections, or the background to be a Reynolds. I need someone who can navigate my social and business world. You can barely identify the correct utensils at a formal dinner." Each word pierced Amara like a sharpened blade. The man before her was a stranger, nothing like the Ethan who had sworn eternal love as he slipped a ring on her finger. "What about your ring, then?" she asked, her voice trembling. "An error in judgment on my part," he replied coldly. "Obviously, you'll need to return it." Ethan then slid a check across the table. "Consider this compensation for your time. $50,000 is more than generous." Amara stared at the check, feeling a nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. In that moment, everything became painfully clear. She had never been true love, just an exotic distraction, a charity project he was now discarding. With dignity she didn't know she possessed, Amara slowly removed the diamond ring from her finger and placed it on the table. Then she picked up the check and methodically tore it into small pieces, letting them fall onto the ring. "One day you'll regret treating me like I was disposable," she whispered, rising to her feet. "And when that day comes, remember this moment, when you traded something genuine for something that seemed more fitting to your image." Ethan's composed facade cracked briefly, surprise flickering across his features before he controlled his expression again. "You're being dramatic, Amara. This is simply the most practical solution for both of us." "Practical?" She gave a small, sad laugh. "There was nothing practical about loving you, Ethan. That was my mistake." She walked away with her head high, feeling the stares of the other diners, but refusing to let them see her break. Only when she was safely inside a taxi did the tears come, streaming down her face as Manhattan's glittering skyline blurred outside the window. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked gently. "Queens," she managed to say, giving her address. The contrast between the luxury she was leaving behind and the small apartment awaiting her couldn't have been more stark. That night, alone in her tiny Queens apartment, Amara cried until her eyes ran dry. One hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, while the other held her NYU MBA acceptance letter where she studied on partial scholarship. "We're going to be okay," she promised the forming baby. "I'll give you everything you need without him." She looked around her modest apartment, the second-hand furniture, the stack of textbooks on the coffee table, the framed photo of her mother who had worked countless hours cleaning other people's homes to give Amara a shot at education. This was who she was, and for the first time that night, it didn't feel like something to be ashamed of. Morning came, finding Amara with swollen eyes but a resolute expression. She made herself tea, sat at her small kitchen table, and began writing in a notebook. If she was going to have this baby, she needed a plan. MBA students with newborns weren't exactly common, but she refused to defer her dreams. She would find a way. The weeks that followed brought the brutal reality of pregnancy without support. Morning sickness made her early classes a challenge, but she refused to miss a single one. By afternoon, she waited tables at a cafe near campus, and evenings found her working as an administrative assistant at a law firm, entering data until midnight before finally returning home to study. When an ultrasound revealed she was expecting triplets, momentary panic gave way to even fiercer determination. "Triplets?" she had gasped, staring at the monitor where 3 distinct heartbeats pulsed. "Congratulations," the technician said, clearly unsure if this was good news to the young, single woman before her. Refusing to inform Ethan, who had already been photographed with a senator's daughter at social events just weeks after abandoning her, Amara built a support network among classmates and compassionate neighbors. When pregnancy complications forced her to quit her physical jobs in the 7th month, her entrepreneurship professor, Dr. Gloria Martinez, offered her a remote internship at her educational technology startup. "Your final project on adaptive technology for children with different learning styles was brilliant," Dr. Martinez said. "You have a mind for business and a heart for education, a rare and valuable combination." On the day Zora, Malcolm, and Maya were born, 3 healthy babies with their father's unmistakable green eyes, Amara made a solemn vow in the quiet of her hospital room. "I will build something so extraordinary that one day when he looks at what he lost, he'll understand that I was never the problem," she whispered to her sleeping infants. "I was never insufficient. And you'll grow up knowing your worth, regardless of who chooses not to love you." With her babies sleeping beside her, Amara began sketching in her notebook the concept of what would become her empire, an educational technology platform that would revolutionize access to personalized learning. Each line drawn wasn't just a business plan, but a promise of a future that Ethan Reynolds could never have imagined when he dismissed her as insufficient for his world. While drying her tears, Amara couldn't possibly imagine that in 9 years she would be standing on the stage of an international conference announcing a $500 million contract, while Ethan Reynolds watched from the audience, finally understanding what he had lost. In the weeks following that devastating night at Per Se, Amara Johnson hunched over the toilet in a NYU bathroom stall, her hand pressed against her mouth to muffle the sound of her retching. Morning sickness, the pregnancy books called it, though hers seemed to strike at all hours of the day. When the nausea finally subsided, she leaned against the cool metal partition, eyes closed, gathering her strength. "Amara, are you okay in there?" A classmate's concerned voice came from outside the stall. "Fine," she managed, forcing brightness into her tone. "Must have been something I ate." This had become her daily ritual, hiding her pregnancy from curious eyes while trying to maintain her perfect GPA. Her days had taken on a punishing rhythm. Morning classes with bathroom breaks timed between lectures, afternoons waiting tables at a cafe near campus, and evenings working as an administrative assistant at a law firm, entering data until her eyes burned. By the time she returned to her apartment each night, exhaustion claimed her before she could even open her textbooks. She would awaken hours later, disoriented, to find her face pressed against pages of financial modeling concepts, drool threatening to smudge her meticulous notes. "Just get through today," she whispered to herself each morning, one day at a time. Her tip money went straight into a coffee can labeled Baby Fund, though she still thought of it in the singular. It wasn't until her 12-week appointment that her carefully constructed plans shattered completely. "Let's take a look at how the little one is doing," Dr. Liu said cheerfully, squirting cold gel onto Amara's slightly rounded belly. Amara stared at the ceiling, trying not to think about how Ethan should have been beside her, holding her hand, sharing this moment. The ultrasound wand pressed against her abdomen, and Dr. Liu's movements suddenly slowed, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Is something wrong?" Amara asked, panic rising in her throat. "Not wrong exactly," Dr. Liu murmured, adjusting the wand. "I'm actually seeing—" She paused, angling the screen so Amara could see. "Do you notice anything?" Amara squinted at the grainy black and white image, unsure what she was supposed to be looking for. I'm detecting 3 distinct heartbeats," Dr. Liu said, her voice gentle but clinical. "You're carrying triplets, Ms. Johnson." The room seemed to tilt beneath her. "Triplets?" "Yes," Dr. Liu confirmed, pointing to the screen. Here, and here, 3 separate fetuses, each with a strong heartbeat." Amara lay frozen on the examination table, the word echoing in her mind. Triplets. Not one baby to feed, clothe, and care for while pursuing her degree. 3 infants needing everything at once. 3 college tuitions someday. 3 of everything. She rode the subway home in a daze, one hand pressed protectively against her belly, the other clutching the ultrasound images. Fellow passengers blurred around her as the magnitude of her situation settled into her bones. In her apartment, she emptied the baby fund jar onto her bed, counting the bills and coins with trembling fingers. The sum that had seemed promising for 1 child now appeared laughably inadequate for 3. She calculated and recalculated her budget into the early morning hours, slashing every non-essential expense, but the numbers refused to cooperate with reality. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Around dawn, she opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. For one weak moment, she considered searching for Ethan's email address. Surely he had a right to know he'd fathered not 1 child, but 3. Surely even he wouldn't turn his back on his own flesh and blood. Then her Instagram feed loaded, and there he was. Ethan Reynolds, arm draped casually around Catherine Winters, the senator's daughter, at some black-tie charity gala. The caption read, "Power couple alert." Reynolds Enterprises heir and Senator Winter's daughter make their official debut at the Metropolitan Museum benefit. The photo had been posted just 3 weeks after their breakup. While she'd been vomiting in public restrooms between classes, he'd already moved on to someone more suitable for the Reynolds legacy, someone who undoubtedly knew which fork to use for the fish course. Amara slammed her laptop shut, tears of anger replacing her momentary vulnerability. He had made his choice. These babies were hers now, and hers alone. She redoubled her efforts at work, taking extra shifts and tutoring wealthier students in statistics for additional income. But as her pregnancy progressed, her body began to betray her determination. During her 6th month, dizzy spells became more frequent. During one particularly busy lunch shift at the cafe, the room suddenly spun around her, dishes crashing to the floor as she grasped for support. "That's it," her manager said firmly, helping her to a chair. "You've been amazing, Amara, but I can't in good conscience keep you on. You're carrying 3 babies, for God's sake." 1 week later, her supervisor at the law firm reached the same conclusion after finding Amara asleep at her desk at midnight, her swollen ankles propped on a stack of file folders. "We'll hold your position for after the babies come," he promised kindly, though they both knew it was a polite fiction. With her income sources vanishing and her savings dwindling, panic began to set in. She was 7 months pregnant with triplets, living alone in a 5th-floor walk-up with no elevator, and running out of options. The unexpected lifeline came during office hours with Dr. Gloria Martinez, her entrepreneurship professor. Amara had dragged herself to campus despite being on doctor-ordered bed rest, desperate to discuss an extension on her final project. Dr. Martinez took one look at Amara's exhausted face and swollen body and ushered her into her office. "You shouldn't be here, Amara. Your health comes first." "I can't afford to fall behind," Amara admitted, lowering herself carefully into a chair. "These babies are coming whether I'm ready or not." Dr. Martinez studied her thoughtfully. "Your project proposal on adaptive educational technology for different learning styles, it's brilliant, you know. Some of the most innovative thinking I've seen from a student in years." Amara blinked in surprise. "Thank you, but I've been meaning to speak with you about it, actually." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "I'm running a small edtech startup on the side. We're developing software for personalized learning, but we're stuck on the adaptive algorithms. Your approach could be exactly what we need." Hope flickered in Amara's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you a remote internship. Work from home. Set your own hours. The pay isn't much, but the experience would be valuable. And who knows? If your ideas are as good in practice as they are on paper, this could turn into something more permanent." For the first time in months, Amara felt the weight on her shoulders lighten just a fraction. The remaining weeks of her pregnancy passed in a blur of coding sessions from her bed, virtual meetings, and increasingly frequent medical appointments. Her doctor, concerned about the strain of carrying triplets in her small frame, scheduled a C-section for the beginning of her 34th week. On a rainy Tuesday morning, alone except for Dr. Martinez, who had insisted on accompanying her, Amara was wheeled into the delivery room. The fear that had been her constant companion for months crystallized into a single terrifying thought. What if I can't do this? But when the first cry pierced the air, followed quickly by 2 more, something fierce and protective unfurled in Amara's chest. The nurses placed the 3 tiny bundles on her chest one by one, first Zora, then Malcolm, and finally Maya, each with a shock of dark hair and unmistakable green eyes that mirrored their absent fathers. "They're perfect, doctor," Martinez whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Absolutely perfect." That night, after the visitors had gone and the hospital had quieted, Amara gazed at her 3 sleeping infants in their clear bassinets beside her bed. Despite the pain of her incision and the overwhelming exhaustion, her mind buzzed with clarity and purpose. She reached for the notebook doctor. Martinez had brought her, filled with ideas they'd been developing for the adaptive learning platform. By the dim light above her bed, she began to sketch out a new section. Not just algorithms for different learning styles, but an entire ecosystem of educational support, accessible to all children regardless of background or resources. I'm going to build something so extraordinary that one day, when he looks at what he lost, he'll understand that I was never the problem, she whispered to her sleeping babies. I was never insufficient, and you'll grow up knowing your worth, regardless of who chooses not to love you. Her pen moved across the page, each line not just a business concept, but a promise to her children and to herself. As she wrote, a plan began to take shape, not just for survival, but for triumph. While sketching ideas for her future company in her hospital notebook, Amara didn't know she was laying the groundwork for what would become a technological empire that would completely eclipse the Reynolds fortune. The sketchbook filled with business concepts remained on Amara's nightstand 3 years later, its pages now dog-eared and coffee-stained, but its vision fully alive. Dawn barely broke over Queens as Amara Johnson slipped out of bed at 4 o'clock, careful not to disturb the trio of toddlers finally sleeping soundly after a night of rotating wake-ups. She padded silently to the living room of their small apartment, where 3 wooden cribs still dominated the space despite her best efforts at efficient furniture arrangement. Balancing her laptop on her knees, she opened the code she'd been debugging until 1 in the morning. The adaptive learning algorithm she'd designed was revolutionary in concept, but still frustratingly buggy in execution. Dr. Martinez's startup had evolved dramatically since Amara joined, largely due to her insights into personalized education technology. The remote position had been a lifeline, allowing her to care for the triplets while contributing meaningful work from home. "Just 2 more hours," she whispered to herself, taking a sip of cold coffee from yesterday's mug. 2 precious hours of silence before the cheerful chaos of 3 18-month-old babies would consume every moment of her attention. A soft whimper from Malcolm's crib signaled the potential end of her quiet work time. Amara held her breath, willing him back to sleep. After a tense moment, his breathing deepened again, and she exhaled in relief. These stolen hours were her only chance to complete both her work assignments and her MBA coursework. The schedule she'd created for herself was punishing, but necessary. 4 to 6 in the morning for coding and development work, 6 to 8 for preparing bottles, changing diapers, and feeding the triplets their breakfast, 9 to noon for virtual classes while the babies napped or played in their playpen beside her desk. Afternoons were devoted entirely to the children. Developmental activities, walks to the park, critical bonding time. Evenings meant dinner, baths, and bedtime stories, followed by more coding until she collapsed from exhaustion around 1, only to repeat the cycle 3 hours later. Dark circles had become permanent fixtures beneath her eyes, but determination pushed her forward each day. The triplets were thriving despite their challenging start, and her academic performance remained stellar. Her professors marveled at her ability to maintain a near-perfect GPA while raising 3 babies alone. 5 months later, Amara stood on the NYU commencement stage, her graduation robe flowing over a simple dress purchased from a thrift store. In her arms, she balanced Malcolm on one hip, while her neighbor Mrs. Patel held Zora and Maya at the edge of the stage. "Amara Johnson, Master of Business Administration with highest honors," announced the dean, shaking her hand as flashbulbs captured the unusual sight of a graduate with a toddler on her hip. The audience erupted in applause, particularly from the section where several of her neighbors and classmates sat, many of whom had become her village of support. They had traded childcare for English lessons, math tutoring, or simply home-cooked meals when Amara was too exhausted to cook. Back in their apartment that evening, Amara placed her diploma on the wall next to the children's height chart. The contrast between her academic achievement and the reality of their cramped living conditions wasn't lost on her. 3 cribs still dominated the living room while toys spilled from every available storage space. "We did it, little ones," she whispered to the sleeping toddlers after their celebration dinner of mac and cheese shaped like cartoon characters. Step 1 complete. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "Need to discuss future of company. Big acquisition offer. Call me when you can." A knot formed in Amara's stomach. The educational software they'd been developing had shown remarkable results in early testing. Several venture capital firms had expressed interest, but an acquisition could mean the end of their original vision, making adaptive learning accessible to all children, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The following morning, after arranging for Mrs. Patel to watch the triplets, Amara met Dr. Martinez at a small coffee shop near campus. "They're offering $3 million, Dr. Martinez said without preamble, but they want to pivot to corporate training applications, more profitable than K-12 education." Amara's heart sank. That would abandon everything we've been working toward. The whole point was to help children who learn differently, to level the playing field regardless of background. "I know," Dr. Martinez sighed. "But the investors are pressuring me. Educational software for underserved communities isn't exactly a goldmine." Amara stared into her coffee cup, mind racing. 3 years of work, of coding through exhaustion, of believing they could make a difference. She couldn't let it end like this. "What if I bought your share?" The words tumbled out before she could reconsider. "I could take over the educational application while you pursue the corporate direction." Dr. Martinez's eyebrows shot up. "With what money, Amara? You're raising triplets on a part-time developer's salary." That night, after putting the children to bed, Amara spread her financial records across the kitchen table. Her savings were minimal, just enough for 3 months of expenses if emergency struck. Her student loans loomed large, but the potential of their educational platform kept her awake, calculating, planning. The next morning, she approached her bank about a business loan, leveraging her perfect credit score and MBA credentials. She called former classmates who had expressed interest in educational technology. She even considered selling the small gold locket her mother had given her before passing away, her only inheritance. 3 days later, she returned to Dr. Martinez with a folder containing her business plan, financial projections, and commitment letters from 2 former classmates willing to invest small amounts. "I've secured $80,000, Amara said, sliding the folder across the table. "It's not $3 million, but it's enough to continue developing the educational platform for another year. I want to buy your share and preserve our original vision." Dr. Martinez studied the materials, then looked up with an expression Amara couldn't quite read. "Or," she said slowly, "we could be equal partners and build something meaningful together." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want to sell out either, Amara. I was testing you." A smile spread across her face. "If you're willing to risk everything for this vision, I'm in too. Let's turn down the acquisition and double down on our original mission." 2 weeks later, they signed the paperwork establishing Ascension Tech, with Amara and Dr. Martinez as equal co-founders. The name reflected their shared vision, helping students rise beyond their circumstances through personalized education. Their first breakthrough came 4 months later when an angel investor whose child had benefited from their prototype offered $250,000 in seed funding. "Your algorithm adapted perfectly to Sophia's dyslexia," he explained. "Traditional educational software never worked for her. This is the first time she's actually enjoying learning to read." As Ascension Tech began to gain momentum, the triplets reached their 3rd birthday, each displaying remarkable abilities. Malcolm could solve complex puzzles designed for children twice his age, his analytical mind constantly searching for patterns. Zora had perfect pitch, singing back melodies after hearing them just once. Maya crafted elaborate stories, dictating them to Amara, who dutifully transcribed them into a special journal. Their personalities were as distinct as their talents. Malcolm observed the world with quiet intensity, cataloging information like a miniature scientist. Zora approached life with passionate enthusiasm, her emotions running deep and visible. Maya possessed an empathy that seemed impossible in one so young, often comforting others with a wisdom beyond her years. One evening, as Amara helped Malcolm construct a particularly challenging puzzle, he looked up suddenly with his piercing green eyes. So like Ethan's, it sometimes stole her breath. "Mommy, why don't we have a daddy like other kids?" he asked, his small hands still efficiently sorting puzzle pieces by color and shape. The question she'd been dreading hung in the air as Zora and Maya abandoned their activities to listen. 3 pairs of identical green eyes focused on her, waiting. Amara set down the puzzle piece she was holding and chose her words carefully. "Some families are different from others. In our family, it's just me and you 3. But what matters isn't who's missing, it's how much love we have for each other." "But Billy at preschool said everyone has to have a daddy," persisted Malcolm, ever the logician. "Billy is mostly right," Amara acknowledged. "Everyone has a biological father, but not everyone has a daddy who lives with them or takes care of them." "Where's our biological father?" asked Maya, stumbling slightly over the new word. Amara swallowed hard. "He lives in another city. He wasn't ready to be a daddy when you were born." "Did he not like us?" Zora's lower lip trembled. "Oh, sweetheart, no." Amara gathered all 3 into her arms. "He never even met you. The choice he made wasn't about you at all. Sometimes adults make decisions based on their own fears and problems." Later that night, after triple goodnight kisses and bedtime stories, Amara signed the lease on a new apartment, their first with a separate bedroom for the children. As she packed their belongings, she came across the positive pregnancy test she'd kept, now faded with time. So much had changed since that night at Per Se. She was no longer the naive girl Ethan had discarded, but a businesswoman with purpose, a mother with unwavering determination. As she tucked the triplets into bed in their new room, Amara had no idea that in just 6 years, she would be leading a billion-dollar company, while the Reynolds empire began to crumble under the weight of misguided decisions and kept secrets. 5 years had transformed not just Amara's life, but the very trajectory of educational technology. As she stood before a panel of San Francisco school board officials, her presentation showed dramatic improvements in student performance across all demographics. "The data speaks for itself," Amara concluded, gesturing to the projection behind her. "Our adaptive learning platform improved test scores by 47% in just 1 semester, with the most significant gains among previously underperforming students." The conference room fell silent as the officials exchanged impressed glances. Amara, now 28, carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. Gone were the navy blue dress from Per Se and the uncertainty that had once shadowed her eyes. Today, she wore a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of success without ostentation. "Ms. Johnson," the superintendent finally said, "I believe we've seen enough. Ascension Tech's pilot program has exceeded all expectations. We'd like to implement your platform district-wide for the coming school year." Outside the building, Amara barely contained her elation as she called Dr. Martinez, now her full business partner. "They're in," she said simply. "Full district implementation." "That's our biggest contract yet," Dr. Martinez exclaimed. "The venture capital firms that turned us down last year are going to be kicking themselves." "Speaking of which," Amara replied, "check your email. Horizon Ventures just sent a term sheet. They're offering $10 million in Series A funding." The San Francisco success story turned Ascension Tech from a promising startup into a serious contender in the educational technology space. Articles in industry publications highlighted their unique approach to personalized learning, and Amara found herself invited to speak at conferences she once could only dream of attending. Back in her hotel room that evening, Amara's FaceTime chimed. 3 identical faces crowded the screen, each vying for position. "Mommy, I lost another tooth," Zora announced, displaying the gap in her smile with dramatic flair. "The Tooth Fairy statistical probability is 0, Malcolm declared solemnly, adjusting his glasses. "But I still put it under my pillow. It's a controlled experiment." "I wrote a poem about teeth," Maya chimed in. "Want to hear it?" Amara laughed, her heart aching with love and the familiar pain of separation. These business trips were necessary but increasingly difficult as the triplets, now 5 years old, developed their distinct personalities and remarkable talents. "Tell me everything," she said, settling back against the hotel pillows. "I have all night." The morning routine in their modest but comfortable San Francisco apartment had become a well-choreographed dance. Amara woke at 5 to review international contracts before the children stirred. By 6:30, she was preparing breakfast while reviewing math flashcards with Malcolm, listening to Zora practice piano scales, and helping Maya organize her latest story collection. "Mommy, is this calculation correct?" Malcolm asked, pushing a notebook across the kitchen table. At 5, he was already solving algebraic equations that would challenge middle school students. Amara examined his work. "Perfect, sweetheart. How did you figure out this approach?" "I created a more efficient formula," he replied matter-of-factly, returning to his cereal. Across the room, Zora played a complex Chopin piece, her small fingers dancing across the keyboard with surprising dexterity. The piano had been Amara's first major purchase after their move to San Francisco, a necessary investment for Zora's blossoming talent. "Listen to this part, Mommy," Zora called, repeating a particularly challenging passage. "I fixed the fingering Professor Liu showed me. Mine works better." At the dining table, Maya scribbled furiously in her journal, occasionally pausing to illustrate her stories with colorful drawings. Her kindergarten teacher had already sent home notes suggesting advanced writing classes. "I'm writing about a girl who builds a rocket ship from recycled materials," Maya explained, not looking up. "It's based on scientific principles Malcolm explained to me." Watching her children, Amara felt a familiar surge of fierce pride. Despite everything, despite Ethan's rejection, despite years of bone-crushing fatigue and financial struggle, these 3 extraordinary humans were thriving. They were living proof that Ethan had been catastrophically wrong. She had never been insufficient. As Ascension Tech grew, Amara's schedule became increasingly demanding. International expansion meant late-night calls with Asian markets and early morning meetings with European educators. The triplets were understanding but increasingly vocal about missing her presence. After a particularly grueling week of travel, Amara made a decision. She interviewed dozen candidates before meeting Lucia Velez, a warm, intelligent woman with degrees in both early childhood education and music performance. "I need someone who will love my children almost as much as I do," Amara explained during the interview. "Someone who understands that they're not just gifted, they're kids who need nurturing, boundaries, and space to be themselves." Lucia smiled. "Ms. Johnson, I believe children are whole people from the moment they're born. Complex, capable, and deserving of respect. Being gifted adds challenges, but it doesn't change their fundamental need for security and acceptance." Amara hired her on the spot. With Lucia's help, Amara established a more sustainable rhythm. When she traveled, the children had consistent care from someone who appreciated their unique qualities. When home, Amara could fully engage without the constant pull of household management. During a flight to New York for an educational conference, Amara flipped through a business magazine to distract herself from turbulence. She froze when she encountered a familiar face, Ethan Reynolds, looking significantly more strained than she remembered. The article detailed Reynolds Enterprises' recent struggles, including the loss of a major government contract to a more innovative competitor. Amara studied the photo, noting the lines that hadn't been there 9 years ago, the slight downturn of the mouth that had once smiled so charmingly at her. According to the article, Reynolds Enterprises was struggling to adapt to changing market conditions, relying too heavily on traditional real estate investments while competitors embraced technology and sustainability. Closing the magazine with a small, satisfied smile, Amara tucked it into her carry-on. She felt no malicious pleasure in his difficulties, just a quiet vindication. While Ethan had clung to old ways of doing business, she had built something innovative and meaningful. That evening during their video call, Maya asked the question Amara had been dreading. "Why doesn't our father ever visit us?" she asked, her green eyes, so like Ethan's, serious and searching. Zora immediately bristled. "Who cares?" "We don't need him," Malcolm observed silently, cataloging Amara's reaction with scientific precision. Amara took a deep breath. "Sometimes people make decisions that have nothing to do with the value of those they leave behind," she explained carefully. "Your father made a choice based on what he thought was important at the time. That choice reflects on him, not on you." "But didn't he want to know us?" Maya persisted. "He didn't give himself the chance to know what he was missing," Amara replied honestly. "And that's his loss, because you three are the most amazing people I've ever known." Zora lifted her chin defiantly. "We don't need him. We have you, Mommy. And you have each other," Amara added, blinking back tears. "Always." After the call ended, Amara retrieved the magazine with Ethan's photo. For a moment she allowed herself to remember the whirlwind romance, the promises, the cruel dismissal at per se. Then she placed the magazine in her desk drawer, symbolically filing away the past. What Ethan had once called a burden had become her greatest strength. What he had dismissed as insufficient had proven more than enough, and the children he never knew were flourishing without his name or his wealth, proving daily that worth wasn't determined by social status or family connections. As she prepared for bed, Amara's phone chimed with an email notification. Forbes magazine wanted to profile her as one of their entrepreneurs to watch. The irony wasn't lost on her. 9 years ago, she had been deemed unworthy of the Reynolds name. Now, she was building her own legacy, one based not on inheritance or tradition, but on innovation and impact. Placing the magazine with Ethan's photo in her drawer, Amara didn't imagine that in just 3 years, their paths would cross again on a New York stage, with her as the acclaimed billionaire and him as the declining heir. The Forbes profile propelled Amara Johnson into a new echelon of business visibility. At 30, her transformation from the rejected girl from the Bronx to a rising star in educational technology was becoming the stuff of business school case studies. As she signed the final documents for Ascension Tech's Series B funding round, $75 million to expand into international markets, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. "Congratulations," said Jerome Hayes, the lead investor from Sequoia Capital, extending his hand. "You've built something remarkable here. Educational technology with actual measurable results across all demographic groups. It's revolutionary." Amara smiled, thinking of the countless nights she'd spent coding while the triplets slept, the years of bootstrapping and reinvesting every penny. "Thank you, but this is just the beginning." With the fresh capital infusion, Ascension Tech's expansion accelerated dramatically. Within months, their adaptive learning platform was being implemented in schools across Europe, Asia, and South America. The software, now translated into 14 languages, maintained its core mission, identifying each child's unique learning style and adapting in real time to maximize their potential. On a crisp autumn morning, Amara stood before a Victorian home in San Francisco's Pacific Heights neighborhood, keys in hand. The realtor beamed beside her as the triplets, now 7 years old, raced up the steps. "Can we see our rooms first?" Zora called, her enthusiasm bubbling over as always. Amara nodded, watching as her children disappeared into what would be their first real home, not an apartment, not a rental, but a permanent place with a garden for Maya's flowers, a dedicated music room for Zora's instruments, and a small laboratory space for Malcolm's experiments. "It has good bones," the realtor had said during their first viewing, "but needs updating." Amara had smiled, knowing that updating was code for expensive renovations. But unlike 9 years ago, when such coded language would have made her feel inadequate, She now signed the purchase agreement without hesitation. The $4 million price tag represented security for her children and a tangible symbol of how far they'd come. That evening, sitting on moving boxes in their empty living room, Amara ordered pizza while the triplets explored every corner of their new home. "Mommy, the acoustics in my music room are perfect," Zora announced, twirling into the living room. At 7, she already had the presence of a performer, her movements graceful from years of dance lessons. "I calculated the square footage of each room," Malcolm said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "The proportional distribution is optimal for our family dynamics." Maya appeared with a notebook filled with colorful drawings. "I've designed how each room should look. This one should be blue like the ocean because it faces west where the sun sets." Watching them, Amara marveled at how different they were despite sharing identical DNA. Malcolm, analytical and precise, approached the world as a series of fascinating problems to solve. His math abilities had already attracted attention from educational specialists who struggled to find material challenging enough for him. Zora lived in a world of sound and movement, her emotional intelligence as developed as her musical talent. Her violin teacher, a former concert master, had declared her a once-in-a-generation talent, and Maya, with her empathetic soul and storyteller's imagination, wove words and images together in ways that transported readers into worlds of her creation. Her first children's book, written at age 6 and illustrated with her own drawings, had been published through a small, independent press after her art teacher showed it to a friend in publishing. 2 months after moving into their new home, Malcolm came home clutching a gold medal, his expression serious despite his achievement. "First place in the state mathematics competition," he announced matter-of-factly, handing Amara the certificate. "I competed against 8th graders." The following weekend, Amara sat in a concert hall, tears streaming down her face as Zora performed a violin concerto with the Youth Symphony, her small figure commanding the stage with surprising authority. And on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Amara beamed with pride as Maya signed copies of her first published book at a local bookstore, a line of children and parents stretching out the door. "My mommy helped me make my story better," Maya told each child who approached, her green eyes, so like Ethan's, warm with genuine connection. "She says everyone has a story worth telling." These moments of maternal pride were punctuated by increasingly frequent news about Reynolds Enterprises. One evening, as Amara prepared dinner, a financial news segment caught her attention. "Reynolds Enterprises faces scrutiny over tax irregularities," announced the anchor as Ethan's image appeared on screen. "The Boston-based real estate developer is under investigation for potentially improper deductions related to international holdings." Ethan looked strained. The confident smirk she remembered replaced by tight lines around his mouth. He was still handsome, but harder somehow, the privilege in his bearing now tinged with defensiveness. Another news item a few weeks later revealed more personal developments. Boston real estate heir Ethan Reynolds divorces senator's daughter after 4 years. The accompanying photo showed Catherine Winters Reynolds exiting a courthouse, her expression grim. Amara felt no satisfaction in his apparent troubles, just a detached acknowledgement that life had continued for both of them, in dramatically different directions. The Forbes interview request came during this period of parallel news cycles. The magazine wanted to profile Amara as part of their Disruptors series, focusing on her journey from single mother to educational technology pioneer. "We're particularly interested in your story as a woman of color in tech, raising triplets while building a company now valued at $1.2 billion, explained the journalist Sophia Winters. "It's an inspiring narrative of overcoming obstacles." They met at Ascension Tech's sleek headquarters, where Amara had insisted on incorporating a state-of-the-art childcare facility for employees' children. The interview progressed smoothly until Sophia ventured into more personal territory. "As a single mother of triplets, you've never publicly discussed their father," she noted, watching Amara carefully. "Have you ever felt your children needed a paternal figure in their lives?" Amara maintained her composure, having anticipated this line of questioning. My children have wonderful male mentors, teachers, coaches, my business partners. Family comes in many configurations. What matters isn't structure but love, consistency, and support. Would you say your experience as a single parent has influenced your business approach? Absolutely, Amara replied, shifting the conversation back to safer ground. Raising children while building a company teaches ruthless prioritization. Every minute must count. There's no room for ego or inefficiency. That night, after checking on the sleeping triplets, Amara opened her laptop and hesitated before navigating to a password-protected folder hidden deep within her files. Inside were photos from another lifetime, Amara and Ethan in Central Park, at museum openings, at the restaurant where he'd proposed. She studied his face in the images, trying to reconcile the man she'd once loved with the business figure now appearing in financial news for all the wrong reasons. There was a time when these photos had been painful to view, each image a reminder of her rejection, of being deemed insufficient for the Reynolds legacy. Now they seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. The young woman with the hopeful smile and the simple dresses seemed like a distant relative rather than her former self. With newfound clarity, Amara selected all files in the folder and permanently deleted them. The symbolic act required no ceremony, no emotional processing. She was simply clearing digital space, much as she'd cleared mental space for more important priorities years ago. As she closed her laptop, her phone chimed with an email confirming details for an upcoming educational conference in New York, the one where she would announce Ascension Tech's landmark contract with the U.S. Department of Education. The $500 million implementation would bring their adaptive learning platform to underserved districts nationwide. While finalizing preparations for the New York Educational Conference, where she would announce Ascension Tech's largest contract in history, Amara didn't realize that Eleanor Reynolds, the matriarch who had orchestrated her abandonment, was about to discover the existence of her talented grandchildren. While finalizing preparations for the New York Educational Conference, Amara's phone chimed with an unexpected notification. The name in her inbox made her blood run cold: Eleanor Reynolds. After 9 years of silence, the matriarch who had orchestrated her abandonment had suddenly appeared in her digital life like an unwelcome ghost. Amara stared at the unread email, her finger hovering over the screen. The Ascension Tech offices hummed with activity around her as her team prepared for what would be the company's most significant announcement to date, a $500 million contract with the U.S. Department of Education. Yet everything suddenly seemed distant, muffled by the roaring in her ears. "Ms. Johnson?" Her assistant knocked gently on the open door. "The conference call with the education secretary is in 5 minutes." "Thank you, Rachel," Amara replied, quickly locking her phone screen. "I'll be right there." Only hours later, alone in her office with the San Francisco skyline glittering beyond her windows, did Amara finally open the message. "Dear Ms. Johnson, I have recently become aware of my grandchildren's existence. I would like to discuss this matter in person during your upcoming stay in New York. Eleanor Reynolds." The message's brevity only amplified its presumption. 9 years of complete disinterest, and now Eleanor felt entitled to a meeting? Amara's hand trembled slightly as she set down her phone. How had Eleanor discovered the triplets? And why now, when Ascension Tech was making headlines and Amara's net worth had surpassed the billion-dollar mark? She opened her laptop and typed "Reynolds Enterprises Financial Troubles" into the search bar. The results confirmed what she'd been hearing in business circles. The once mighty real estate empire was struggling. Articles detailed failed expansions, tax investigations, and rumors of liquidity problems. One particularly detailed analysis suggested the company needed an influx of capital or new leadership to weather the current storm. "So that's it," Amara murmured. "Now that I'm worth something to you, suddenly my children matter." She drafted and deleted 5 different responses before closing her email without sending anything. Eleanor Reynolds deserved no reply, no acknowledgement. That evening, as Amara helped the triplets pack for their trip to New York, she found herself studying their faces more intently than usual. At 8 years old, they were developing distinct personalities that contrasted with their identical green eyes, Ethan's eyes. "Are you excited to see New York?" she asked, helping Malcolm fold his meticulously selected outfits. "I've been studying the subway map," he replied, adjusting his glasses. "The mathematical elegance of the system is fascinating despite its inefficiencies." Across the room, Zora was carefully placing her violin in its case. "My teacher says Carnegie Hall has the best acoustics in the world. Can we go see it, even if we can't attend a performance?" "Of course," Amara promised, then turned to Maya, who was unusually quiet as she packed her journals. "What about you, sweetheart? What are you looking forward to in New York?" Maya looked up, her expression thoughtful. "It's where we were born, right? I want to feel if it remembers us." The next morning, Amara called James Levin, her attorney, requesting an urgent meeting before their departure. "Eleanor Reynolds contacted me," she explained, once they were seated in his office. "She wants to meet about the children during our New York trip." James frowned. After 9 years of silence? That's suspicious timing. "Reynolds Enterprises is in financial trouble," Amara said. "I suspect she sees the triplets as potential salvation for their family legacy." "You're probably right," James agreed, opening a file on his computer. "Here's what we know about their situation. The company has lost major contracts to more innovative competitors. Their traditional real estate holdings are underperforming, and Ethan's leadership has been questioned by the board. The divorce from Catherine Winters was costly, both financially and in terms of political connections. And suddenly, 3 genius children with Reynolds blood become interesting," Amara concluded bitterly. "Exactly," James nodded. "But legally, your position is strong. Ethan has never been listed on the birth certificates, never paid child support, never attempted contact. He has effectively abandoned any parental rights he might have claimed." "So what should I do about Eleanor's email?" "Nothing," James advised. "You're under no obligation to respond. But be prepared. The Reynolds family isn't known for accepting rejection gracefully." 2 days before their departure, Amara sat the triplets down for a conversation she'd been rehearsing in her mind. "There's something I need to tell you before we go to New York," she began carefully. "You might hear questions or comments about your father while we're there." Malcolm's analytical mind immediately connected the dots. Because he lives in Boston, which is geographically proximate to New York, increasing the statistical probability of encountering individuals who know him. "Yes, exactly," Amara confirmed. "And because our company is getting more attention now, people might become curious about our family." "Will we meet him?" Maya asked directly, her storyteller's imagination clearly spinning possibilities. Amara chose her words carefully. "I don't have plans for that, but I want you to be prepared in case questions arise." Zora's reaction was immediately protective. "We don't need to meet him. He didn't want us, remember?" "It's more complicated than that," Amara explained gently. "When adults make certain choices, they're often responding to pressures and expectations that have nothing to do with the people they hurt. Like his mother not approving of you because you grew up in the Bronx," Malcolm stated matter-of-factly. Amara blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" "I found your old NYU thesis online," he explained. "In the acknowledgments, you mentioned ER, who taught you that worth isn't determined by others' acceptance. I researched possible ER identities and calculated the highest probability candidates based on geographical and temporal factors." "You never told me," Amara said softly. Malcolm shrugged. "It seemed to make you sad when we asked about him." "I didn't want to make you sad." That night, after the triplets were asleep, Amara pulled out an old shoebox from the back of her closet. Inside were hospital bracelets, first ultrasound images, and photos of the triplets as newborns. evidence of Ethan's paternity she had preserved without fully understanding why. Would she need these someday as proof, as leverage, or had some part of her always known this confrontation was inevitable? The morning of their departure, Amara received another email, this one from William Reynolds, Ethan's father, whom she'd met only twice during her relationship with Ethan. Dear Ms. Johnson, I understand my wife has contacted you regarding our grandchildren. I wish to speak with you separately during your New York visit. Unlike Eleanor, my intentions are not financially motivated. I am in poor health and would value the opportunity to make peace before my time ends. Respectfully, William Reynolds. This message, so different in tone from Eleanor's demanding note, gave Amara pause. Was it possible that not all the Reynolds family shared Eleanor's calculating nature? On the private jet chartered for their journey, Amara watched the triplets settle into their seats. Malcolm immediately opening a book on quantum physics, Zora composing music on her tablet, Maya sketching the clouds outside her window. These extraordinary children had thrived without the Reynolds name or fortune. What could that family possibly offer them now that would outweigh the potential complications? As the plane took off, Amara checked the security arrangements at the Four Seasons one final time. She had reserved the entire penthouse floor and arranged for additional security personnel during their stay. The children would never be alone. Lucia would remain with them whenever Amara was at business functions. Every contingency had been planned for, except perhaps the emotional impact of returning to the city where her heart had been broken and her children had been born. New York held both her greatest pain and the beginning of her greatest joy. Watching the California coastline recede beneath them, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would change everything. The carefully separated worlds she had maintained for 9 years, her past with Ethan and her present with the triplets, were about to collide in ways she couldn't fully anticipate. While the plane headed toward New York, Amara couldn't predict that in less than 48 hours, she would be face to face with Ethan Reynolds in a public confrontation that would forever change the power balance between them. The wheels of their private jet touched down at JFK as the New York skyline glittered in the early evening light. Amara felt a strange tightening in her chest. This city held so many memories, both painful and profound. As they deplaned, the triplets' excitement was palpable, their identical green eyes wide with wonder at the bustling terminal. The population density of Manhattan is approximately 72,000 people per square mile, Malcolm announced, adjusting his glasses as they settled into the waiting luxury SUV. That's approximately 27 times more dense than San Francisco. Will we see snow? Maya asked, pressing her face against the window. I want to write a poem about snow falling on skyscrapers. Zora was unusually quiet, her fingers moving in silent patterns against her thigh, practicing violin fingerings even without her instrument. Not this trip, sweetheart, Amara answered Maya while giving Zora's hand a gentle squeeze. It's only November, but maybe we can come back in December if you'd like. The ride to the Four Seasons took them through familiar streets that Amara had once walked as a struggling student. Now, she returned as a billionaire CEO with a security detail. The irony wasn't lost on her. Ms. Johnson, welcome back, the hotel manager greeted them personally at the private entrance. The penthouse suite is prepared according to your specifications. The additional security personnel are already in position. Upstairs, the triplets raced through the expansive penthouse, marveling at the panoramic views of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. Is this where we were born? Zora asked, pressing her hand against the floor-to-ceiling windows. No, sweetheart, Amara replied softly. You were born at Mount Sinai Hospital, not far from here. We lived in a much smaller place in Queens then. Approximately 973 square feet, Malcolm added matter-of-factly. I calculated it from the floor plan in your old lease agreement. Amara shook her head with a smile. Nothing escaped Malcolm's meticulous attention to detail. After settling the children with Lucia, Amara reviewed the final details for tomorrow's press conference with her team. The announcement of the $500 million contract would transform educational access for underserved communities nationwide. It represented everything she had worked toward, validation of her vision that personalized education could level the playing field for all children. The education secretary confirmed his attendance, her communications director reported. All major news outlets will be covering it. Forbes wants that exclusive we promised them. Perfect, Amara nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. 9 years ago, she had been deemed insufficient for the Reynolds legacy. Tomorrow, she would announce a deal that would cement her own. As Lucia prepared the triplets for dinner at the hotel's restaurant, Amara changed into a simple but elegant black dress, Chanel, though she wore it with the same confidence she'd once worn thrift store finds. Success hadn't changed her values, only her wardrobe budget. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet energy of New York's elite. Amara watched proudly as her children navigated the formal setting with practiced ease, another ironic echo of Ethan's cruel dismissal. He had mocked her inability to identify the correct utensils, yet her children handled multi-course fine dining as naturally as breathing. "Malcolm, please explain to the waiter why the soufflé collapsed," Zora teased her brother, who had been discussing molecular gastronomy with their server. "It's simple thermodynamics," Malcolm began earnestly. "The air bubbles expanded during baking, but—" Amara's laughter at Malcolm's impromptu science lesson died in her throat as she noticed an elegant older woman watching their table intently from across the restaurant. The immaculate silver hair, the aristocratic posture, the calculating gaze. Eleanor Reynolds was unmistakable, though 9 years had added fine lines to her haughty face. "Children," Amara said quietly, "it's time to head upstairs." "But we haven't had dessert," Zora protested. "We'll have it sent up," Amara replied, signaling for the check. Her eyes never left Eleanor, who had now risen from her table and was moving purposefully toward them. Amara positioned herself between her children and the approaching woman, her protective instinct flaring. "Let's go now, please." As they stood to leave, Eleanor reached their table, her gaze fixed on the triplets with unsettling intensity. "Miss Johnson," she said, her voice as cold and precise as Amara remembered. "What a remarkable coincidence." "Not coincidence at all, Mrs. Reynolds," Amara replied evenly. "You knew I was staying here. That's why you came." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly before shifting back to the children. "These must be my grandchildren. They have the Reynolds eyes. Unmistakable." The triplets looked between the two women, confusion evident on their faces. Malcolm studied Eleanor with scientific curiosity, while Zora moved closer to Amara, instinctively sensing tension. Maya, always the most perceptive, slipped her hand into Amara's. "Children, this is Mrs. Reynolds," Amara said carefully. "We need to go upstairs now." "But they are my grandchildren," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising slightly. "We have the right to know them." Amara felt heat rising in her chest. "You had 9 years to know them, Mrs. Reynolds. 9 years during which you showed no interest whatsoever." "Circumstances change," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Family is family." "You made it very clear that we weren't family," Amara countered, aware they were drawing attention. "Children, please head to the elevator with Lucia." As Lucia guided the triplets away, Eleanor stepped closer to Amara, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. "The Reynolds always protect their legacy. These children are part of that legacy, whether you like it or not." She pressed a business card into Amara's hand. "Call my office tomorrow. We can arrange a suitable financial agreement to resolve this situation properly." "There is no situation to resolve," Amara replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My children are not assets to be negotiated over." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Everything has a price, Ms. Johnson. I thought someone from your background would understand that better than most." The comment, so similar to Ethan's cruel dismissal years ago, sent a cold wave through Amara's body. "Goodbye, Mrs. Reynolds." In the elevator, Amara's hands trembled with suppressed rage as she protectively gathered her confused children close. Malcolm looked up at her, his analytical mind clearly processing what had happened. "That woman is related to our biological father, isn't she?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Amara admitted. "She's his mother." "She looked at us like we were specimens," Zora said, her artistic sensitivity capturing Eleanor's calculating assessment perfectly. Back in their suite, after settling the children with dessert and a movie, Amara retreated to her bedroom and examined Eleanor's business card. The embossed Reynolds Enterprises logo seemed to mock her. 9 years ago, she had been deemed unsuitable to bear this name. Now, apparently, her children were suddenly worthy of consideration. Her phone chimed with a text from her assistant. "William Reynolds called again. Says it's urgent he speak with you before tomorrow's announcement." Amara sank onto the edge of her bed, the weight of the past and present colliding with unexpected force. She had built Ascension Tech partly to prove her worth, to show that Ethan had been catastrophically wrong about her potential. Yet here she was, still fighting to keep the Reynolds family from disrupting the life she had so carefully constructed. Looking at her sleeping children later that night, Amara made a decision. After tomorrow's press conference, she would tell them everything, the complete truth about their father, about Eleanor's manipulation, about the choice she had made to raise them without the Reynolds name or money. They were old enough now to understand, and they deserved to hear the full story before anyone else could twist it. What she didn't know was that her carefully planned press conference would become the stage for a confrontation she couldn't possibly anticipate, one that would expose the truth to the world before she could control the narrative. As she placed Eleanor's card in her bedside drawer, Amara had no idea that the next morning when she stepped onto the stage for her historic announcement, Ethan Reynolds would be in the front row, about to cause a scene that would expose the truth to the entire world. Dawn broke over Manhattan as Amara meticulously arranged the triplets' outfits on their beds, 3 perfectly coordinated ensembles for what would be their first public appearance alongside her. For Maya, a deep purple dress with subtle silver accents. For Zora, an emerald green jumpsuit that complemented her confident personality. For Malcolm, a perfectly tailored navy suit with a patterned tie that hinted at mathematical formulas. "Today is very important," she explained as they dressed after breakfast. "You'll be on stage with me when I announce our company's biggest achievement." Malcolm nodded seriously while adjusting his glasses. "The $500 million education contract. It represents a 28% increase in our company's valuation." Amara smiled at his precision. "That's right. But before we go downstairs, there's something important I need to tell you." The triplets gathered around her on the plush sofa in their suite, sensing the gravity in her tone. Amara took a deep breath, retrieving a photograph from her wallet, one she'd kept hidden for years. "This is your biological father," she said softly, showing them the picture of herself and Ethan taken during happier times. "His name is Ethan Reynolds. He's a businessman here in New York." 3 pairs of identical green eyes studied the photograph with varying expressions. Malcolm with analytical intensity, Zora with defensive skepticism, Maya with open curiosity. "He has our eyes," Malcolm observed immediately, his finger tracing Ethan's face in the photograph. "The genetic markers are unmistakable." "Is he the reason that woman was watching us at dinner?" Zora asked, connecting the dots with characteristic quickness. "Yes," Amara confirmed. "That was his mother, your biological grandmother. She recently discovered you exist." Maya touched the photo gently. "Does he know about us now too?" "I'm not sure," Amara answered honestly, "but it's possible we might encounter questions about him today. I wanted you to be prepared." Zora crossed her arms. "Why would anyone ask? He didn't want us." "It's complicated, Zora," Amara explained. "When adults make certain choices, they're not always thinking about the long-term consequences. He made a decision based on what he thought was important at the time. Insufficient data to evaluate his motivations, Malcolm stated, studying the photo with scientific detachment. But the phenotypical resemblance is fascinating. 40 minutes later, they entered the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons where the press conference would take place. The room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from major outlets, education officials, tech industry analysts, and prominent investors filled the rows of chairs. Cameras were positioned strategically throughout the space, ready to broadcast what industry insiders already knew would be a historic announcement. "Full house," whispered her communications director with satisfaction. "Every major outlet is here." Amara nodded, scanning the crowd with practiced calm. Her heart nearly stopped when her gaze reached the front row. There, seated directly in her line of sight, was Ethan Reynolds. 9 years had added subtle lines to his face and a touch of gray at his temples, but those distinctive green eyes, the ones she saw every day in her children's faces, were unmistakable. Their eyes met briefly before Amara forced herself to look away, her mind racing. What was he doing here? Had Eleanor told him about the children? Was this a calculated move to embarrass her publicly? "Ms. Johnson, we're ready whenever you are," the event coordinator prompted gently. Amara squared her shoulders and nodded to the triplets, who stood quietly beside her, unaware that their father was watching them from mere feet away. "Let's begin," she said with a calm she didn't feel. As they walked onto the stage, Amara could feel Ethan's gaze following them. The triplets carried themselves with remarkable poise, taking their seats in the 3 small chairs positioned behind the podium. Flashbulbs exploded as photographers captured the rare sight of Amara Johnson's children, known to exist but seldom seen in public. "Good morning, everyone," Amara began, her voice steady and authoritative. "I'm here to announce a historic partnership between Ascension Tech and the United States Department of Education." She launched into her prepared remarks, detailing the $500 million initiative that would bring their adaptive learning platform to underserved districts nationwide. As she spoke, she could see Ethan's expression from the corner of her eye: shock, recognition, and something else she couldn't quite identify as he stared at the 3 children behind her. 20 minutes into her presentation, Amara opened the floor for questions. Journalists raised hands throughout the room, eager for details about the landmark deal. She fielded several questions about implementation timelines and expected outcomes with practiced ease. Then Ethan stood up. "Ethan Reynolds, Reynolds Enterprises," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Ms. Johnson, considering your impressive success, I'd like to ask about the challenges you faced as a single mother while building your empire." The room fell silent. Amara froze momentarily, her eyes meeting Ethan's directly for the first time in 9 years. Behind her, she sensed the triplets' attention sharpening, particularly Malcolm's, whose analytical mind would be connecting this name to the photograph she had shown them earlier. She recovered quickly, her expression transitioning from surprise to cool composure. "Interesting that you mention that, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, her voice even but with an unmistakable edge. "The challenges were significant, especially because the father of my children decided we weren't worthy of being part of his life. Fortunately, that taught us self-reliance from an early age." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Cameras swiveled between Amara on stage and Ethan in the audience, capturing the palpable tension. "Perhaps we could discuss this in private after the conference," Ethan suggested, a slight flush creeping up his neck as he became aware of the attention now focused on him. "There's nothing to discuss in private that can't be said here," Amara responded firmly. "Transparency is a core value at Ascension Tech, unlike certain real estate companies currently under investigation for questionable accounting practices." The targeted strike landed perfectly. Journalists began photographing frantically while Ethan stood frozen, publicly exposed. The implications of her response spread through the room like wildfire. Amara Johnson's triplets were Ethan Reynolds' children, a connection that no one in the business world had previously known. Amara smoothly redirected the press conference back to the education initiative, fielding remaining questions with professional poise despite the electric atmosphere. When she concluded the formal presentation 15 minutes later, she turned to the triplets, who had maintained remarkable composure despite the unexpected drama. "You did wonderfully," she told them quietly as they exited the stage. "I'm so proud of you." In the private corridor outside the ballroom, Ethan was waiting, his expression a complex mixture of shock and desperation. "Amara, please," he implored, stepping forward. "We need to talk." Malcolm studied Ethan with open curiosity, clearly noting the identical green eyes and other shared features. "Who is this man, Mom?" he asked, though his tone suggested he had already calculated the answer. Before Amara could respond, the elevator doors opened, and Eleanor Reynolds emerged, her aristocratic bearing somehow both brittle and imposing, her calculating gaze immediately fixed on the triplets. "So it's true," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of dynastic concern. "My grandchildren exist." Amara instinctively positioned herself between her children and the Reynolds. "They are not your grandchildren, Mrs. Reynolds. They're my children. There was never any interest in acknowledging them until I built something you consider valuable." "That's not fair," Ethan protested, his voice strained. "I didn't know about them." "You didn't know because you chose not to know," Amara countered, her voice steady but razor-sharp. "You discarded me as inadequate for your world before I could even tell you about the pregnancy. Remember your exact words? A girl from the Bronx like you will never fit into my world." "Well, I created my own world, one that's worth 3 times yours, incidentally." The revelation hung in the air like a sentence. Ascension Tech, valued at $2.7 billion, effectively eclipsed Reynolds Enterprises, especially after their recent financial scandals. "These are your children too, Ethan," Eleanor interjected, her tone calculatingly reasonable. "They have the right to the Reynolds name and the heritage that comes with it." Amara laughed without humor. "I don't think you understand, Mrs. Reynolds. My children don't need the Reynolds name or your compromised inheritance. Malcolm has already developed an algorithm that's being patented. Zora was just accepted to Juilliard's pre-college music program, and Maya published her first children's book at 7. They'll build their own legacies." Ethan's eyes widened at each revelation, the weight of what he had lost becoming unbearably clear. "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, his voice breaking, "but I'm their father. I have legal rights." "Actually, you don't," Amara replied calmly, retrieving documents from her portfolio. "You never registered paternity. You never contributed a cent to their upbringing. Legally, you're a stranger to them, exactly as you chose to be." Ethan staggered as if physically struck while his mother intervened again. "This can be resolved with a proper financial arrangement," Eleanor suggested coldly. "After all, we're all reasonable adults." "That's precisely your problem," Amara responded, addressing them both. "You believe everything has a price, that relationships, people, and integrity can be bought and sold like properties in your portfolio. But some things are non-negotiable." While cameras began to flash in the corridor, someone had alerted the press. Amara felt the world shift beneath her feet. The carefully separated worlds she had maintained for 9 years, her past with Ethan and her present with the triplets, had collided in a way she couldn't have anticipated, with consequences none of them could yet fully comprehend. The cameras continued to flash in the corridor as Amara guided her children away from the Reynolds, their identical green eyes wide with confusion and curiosity. Security personnel formed a protective barrier, creating a path toward the private elevator reserved for their use. "This isn't over," Eleanor called after them, her aristocratic voice cutting through the chaos. "The Reynolds family always protects what is theirs." Amara turned back, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Exactly as I do," she replied, taking her children's hands. "The difference is that I never abandoned what was mine to begin with." The elevator doors closed, shutting out the growing media frenzy. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the lift, Malcolm adjusted his glasses and looked up at Amara with piercing, analytical focus. "He's our biological father," he stated rather than asked. "The man from the photograph, the one whose company is experiencing financial instability." Amara nodded, kneeling to their level despite her designer suit. "Yes, that was Ethan Reynolds." "And that woman," Zora added, her artistic sensitivity making her voice tremble slightly. "She's the one who told him to leave you, because you weren't good enough." Maya, always the most emotionally perceptive, slipped her small hand into Amara's. "But he was wrong, wasn't he, Mom? You were always enough." The elevator reached their penthouse floor, and Amara gathered her children close. "Let's talk inside," she said softly. In their suite, Lucia greeted them with concerned eyes, having watched the confrontation unfold on the live broadcast. Amara asked her to prepare hot chocolate for the children while they settled in the living room, the Manhattan skyline stretching before them through floor-to-ceiling windows. "I plan to tell you everything after the press conference," Amara began, sitting on the sofa with the triplets gathered around her. "But things happened more quickly than I expected." "The man, Ethan. He didn't know about us?" Malcolm asked, his analytical mind trying to organize the facts. "No," Amara confirmed. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I went to tell him during our anniversary dinner. But before I could, he told me his family had investigated my background and decided I wasn't suitable for their world." Zora's face flushed with indignation. "Because you grew up in the Bronx? That's stupid. People like the Reynolds often value things differently than we do," Amara explained carefully. "They prioritize social connections, family history, and appearances." "But you built something better than they have," Malcolm observed. "Ascension Tech's market capitalization exceeds Reynolds Enterprises by approximately 300%. A smile touched Amara's lips. "Yes, but that's not what makes us better, Malcolm. It's that we built something meaningful, something that helps children learn regardless of where they come from." The suite's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Lucia answered, then approached with a troubled expression. "Ms. Johnson, the hotel security coordinator, is calling. Mr. Reynolds is demanding access to this floor. He's creating quite a scene in the lobby." Amara sighed, unsurprised by Ethan's persistence. After 9 years of indifference, he suddenly couldn't wait another moment to see the children he'd never known existed. "Tell them I'll come down," she decided. "The children will remain here with you." "But Mom," Zora began to protest. "I need to handle this," Amara said firmly. "We'll continue our conversation when I return." In the private conference room off the main lobby, Ethan paced like a caged animal. When Amara entered, he stopped abruptly, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and what appeared to be genuine pain. "Triplets," he said, the word hanging in the air between them. "We have triplets." "I have triplets," Amara corrected him gently but firmly. "You have biological offspring you've never met." "Because you never told me," he exploded, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, now slightly disheveled. "How could you keep this from me for 8 years?" 9 years, she corrected. "And I tried to tell you that night at Per Se. I had the pregnancy test in my purse. But you were too busy explaining why I wasn't good enough for your family's legacy." The reminder seemed to physically strike him. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than his 37 years. "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, his voice hollow. "I let my mother dictate my choices. I threw away something real for something that seemed more fitting to my image." Amara recognized her own parting words from that night thrown back at her. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Yes, you did," she agreed, taking the seat across from him. "And while you were building the life your mother wanted, I was building something else entirely." "They're extraordinary," Ethan said softly. Even from those few minutes on stage, I could see it. Their poise, their confidence. They are, Amara nodded. Malcolm's mathematical abilities test off the charts. Zora's music professors say she has perfect pitch and exceptional talent. Maya writes stories that make grown adults cry. Each revelation seemed to wound Ethan further, highlighting all he had missed. First steps, first words, first days of school. I want to know them, he said, leaning forward intently. They're my children too, Amara. I have rights. Legally, you don't, she replied calmly. You've provided no support, shown no interest. But more importantly, they are people, not possessions. They have rights too, including the right to decide if they want a relationship with someone who rejected their mother as unworthy. Ethan flinched at her precision. What are you saying? I'm saying that any relationship with them will be on their terms, not yours, Amara explained. They're old enough to have a say in this. If they want to know you, I won't stand in the way. But I won't force them either. Before Ethan could respond, Amara's phone chimed with a text from her assistant. William Reynolds called again. Insists it's urgent. Says Eleanor doesn't know he's contacting you. Amara frowned slightly at the message. What is it? Ethan asked, noticing her expression. Your father has been trying to reach me, she explained, watching Ethan's surprise. He says it's urgent. My father? Ethan seemed genuinely confused. He's been in poor health for months. Mother's been handling most company matters. Perhaps he has different priorities than Eleanor, Amara suggested. Ethan's expression darkened. My mother is already strategizing. I heard her on the phone with our attorneys before I came down here. She's viewing the children as potential heirs who could secure the Reynolds legacy. And you? Amara asked directly. What do you want, Ethan? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I want to know my children, he said after a moment. I want a chance to be their father. Even though they're half Bronx? Amara couldn't resist asking, her voice soft but pointed. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, the barb finding its mark. I deserve that, he acknowledged. But people can change, Amara. 9 years is a long time. Yes, she agreed, rising from her chair. Long enough for 3 children to develop full personalities, talents, and lives without ever knowing their father's name. Long enough for me to build a company worth billions. Long enough to learn that what you thought was insufficient was actually exactly what they needed. As she moved toward the door, Ethan called after her. Will you at least tell them I want to meet them? Properly? Amara paused, her hand on the doorknob. I'll tell them. The choice will be theirs. Upstairs, she found the triplets waiting anxiously, their homework untouched on the dining table. They looked up in unison as she entered, their identical green eyes, Ethan's eyes, questioning. What did he say? Maya asked immediately. Amara sat down with them, choosing honesty as she always had. He wants to meet you, to get to know you. Why now? Malcolm asked pragmatically. The timing correlates with our company's success and his company's declining market position. That's part of it, Amara acknowledged. But I also think seeing you today made everything real for him in a way it wasn't before. Do we have to meet him? Zora asked, her protective instincts flaring. No, Amara assured her. This is entirely your choice. All 3 of you can decide individually. You don't have to do the same thing. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, Amara received another message, this one with details about William Reynolds' condition. Apparently, Ethan's father was in a private clinic on the Upper East Side, his health failing rapidly. He was requesting a meeting tomorrow morning. As Amara prepared for bed, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, she answered. Ms. Johnson, came a frail but dignified voice. William Reynolds here. Thank you for taking my call. I understand today has been eventful. That's one word for it, Amara replied cautiously. I don't have much time left, the elder Reynolds continued. The doctors give me weeks, not months. There are things that need to be said while I can still say them." When Amara hung up the phone after the conversation with William Reynolds, she had no idea that the meeting the next day would reveal a family conspiracy that would forever change the power balance between the Johnsons and the Reynolds, with consequences none of them could predict. The morning air was crisp as Amara's town car pulled up to an elegant private clinic on the Upper East Side. The building's understated facade belied the exceptional medical care provided within, care available only to those with extraordinary wealth or influence, the kind of place where the truly powerful went to suffer or die away from public scrutiny. "I'll wait here with the children's security detail," Lucia assured her as Amara stepped out of the vehicle. "Take your time." Amara nodded, smoothing her tailored Armani pantsuit before entering the clinic. Inside, a discreet receptionist guided her through hushed corridors to a private suite where William Reynolds awaited. The man who had once embodied the commanding presence of old money New York now appeared shockingly diminished, propped up in his hospital bed. William Reynolds was a shadow of the intimidating patriarch Amara had met briefly during her relationship with Ethan. His once robust frame had hollowed, his skin translucent against the crisp white sheets. "Ms. Johnson," he greeted, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frailty. "Thank you for coming." Amara took the seat beside his bed, maintaining a careful emotional distance. "Your message sounded urgent." William's thin lips curved into a wry smile. "When you're dying, everything becomes urgent." He shifted slightly, wincing with the effort. "I've known about you and my grandchildren for nearly a year." Surprise flickered across Amara's face before she could mask it. "I hired private investigators," William continued. "When the doctors first gave me my prognosis, I wanted to ensure I understood all branches of my family before I departed." "You knew," Amara stated flatly. "And yet you said nothing, did nothing." William reached for a sealed envelope on his bedside table, his hands trembling slightly. "That's not entirely true. This is my revised will. I had DNA tests discreetly performed with samples my investigators obtained. Used cups from the children's school, if you're wondering. I've legally recognized Zora, Malcolm, and Maya as my grandchildren and heirs." Amara accepted the envelope with visible skepticism. "Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate the gesture, but my children don't need—" "This isn't about money," William interrupted gently. "I know you've built your own fortune. This is about rights, about recognition. My grandchildren deserve to know that at least one Reynolds acknowledged their value from the start." A curious warmth spread through Amara's chest, unexpected and almost unwelcome. After 9 years of viewing the Reynolds family as a monolithic entity defined by Eleanor's cold calculation and Ethan's weakness, this nuance was disorienting. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Why not inform your family?" "Because Eleanor and Ethan would do everything possible to prevent it," William answered with sad resignation. "They're masters at protecting the family image above all else, even basic decency. I've played that game for decades, but facing death brings clarity I never had in life." He paused, his breathing labored. "I've allocated 30% of Reynolds Enterprises shares to your children. It's a significant enough stake to ensure they have a voice in the company's future, should they ever wish to exercise it." Amara's mind raced through the implications. 30% would make her children the second largest shareholders after Eleanor. It would fundamentally alter the power dynamics of a company that had been controlled by the Reynolds family for generations. "Eleanor will contest this," she said. "She'll try," William agreed with a ghost of a smile. "But I've ensured the legal framework is ironclad. The DNA evidence is conclusive, and I've documented my sound mind extensively." Before Amara departed, William grasped her hand with surprising strength. "You were exactly what our family needed, someone with integrity, vision, and true strength. They were fools to reject you. Don't make the same mistake by rejecting the possibility of healing, not for them, but for your children." 2 days later, Amara sat at a corner table in Perse, the very restaurant where Ethan had abandoned her 9 years before. The symmetry wasn't lost on her as she watched him approach, his confident stride belying the uncertainty in his eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, settling into the chair across from her. Unlike their last encounter here, he was precisely on time. "I believe in closure," Amara replied calmly, "and because your children deserve to understand where they come from, even if that includes painful parts of the story." Ethan flinched slightly at her phrasing, "your children rather than our children," but didn't challenge it. For 2 hours, they engaged in the honest conversation they should have had 9 years earlier. Ethan spoke of his regret, his awakening to his mother's manipulation, the emptiness of the life he'd chosen over what they might have built together. Amara described the brutal reality of her early years with the triplets, working multiple jobs while completing her MBA, the initial poverty, the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "How did you manage?" Ethan asked, genuine awe in his voice. "3 babies, no support, building a company. It seems impossible." "It nearly was," Amara admitted. "But necessity is a powerful motivator. And perhaps I needed to prove something. To myself. To you. To the world." "You've more than proven it," Ethan acknowledged. "Ascension Tech is revolutionizing education. Our family business seems almost quaint by comparison." "It wasn't about comparison," Amara corrected him. "It was about creating something meaningful." As their coffee cooled between them, Ethan finally voiced what he'd come to say. "I want to know them, Amara, not to claim some right over them, but to offer what I can if they'll allow me." "That will be their decision," she replied. "They're extraordinarily intelligent and perceptive. They won't tolerate falsehoods or empty promises." Ethan nodded, understanding the implicit warning. "How did you raise them so well alone?" he asked, regret evident in his voice. "I was never truly alone," Amara corrected him. "I built a community, something your family with all its wealth never managed to create. My children are loved by dozens of people who chose to be part of our lives. Money can buy comfort, Ethan, but it can't buy belonging." 1 week later, William Reynolds passed peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, the New York social elite whispered behind gloved hands as Amara arrived with the triplets, their presence an explicit acknowledgement from the deceased patriarch himself. The reading of the will in a boardroom filled with executives and family members sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. As William's attorney confirmed the recognition of Zora, Malcolm, and Maya Reynolds Johnson as legitimate heirs to 30% of Reynolds Enterprises shares, Eleanor's face froze in a mask of barely contained fury. "My father knew," Ethan murmured to Amara, finally understanding the old man's strategy. "He wanted to ensure you couldn't ignore or marginalize the children," the family attorney explained privately. "With 30% of the shares, they have a significant voice in the company's future." As reporters swarmed the building and Eleanor Reynolds digested the revelation in furious silence, Amara gathered her children to depart. "Wait," Ethan called, approaching hesitantly. "What happens now?" Amara looked at the man she had once loved, now diminished not by financial bankruptcy but by the belated recognition of his moral failings. "Now you have a choice," she replied. "You can fight this in court, trying to invalidate your father's will and proving exactly why I never wanted my children to carry the Reynolds name. Or you can accept your father's final wisdom and begin building something new, not based on control or appearances, but on responsibility and respect." "And us?" Ethan asked, his gaze pleading. "There is no us, Ethan," Amara answered gently. "There are only choices and their consequences. I chose to build something meaningful from the ashes of what you destroyed. Now it's your turn to choose what kind of father and man you want to be from this point forward." As Amara led her children outside, photographers captured the image that would appear in newspapers the next morning. A united family, mother and 3 extraordinary children, walking confidently toward the future, leaving behind not just a turbulent empire, but a man finally confronting the true cost of his choices. In the car, Maya asked curiously, "Will we allow him to get to know us, Mom?" Amara smiled at her children, her greatest achievement, her true legacy. "That, my loves, will be entirely your decision, as I always say. Our worth isn't dependent on others' acceptance," the triplets finished in unison, a lesson learned not through words, but through the living example of their extraordinary mother. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.